Fireworks exploded over Miami Bay, dazzling the carnival crowd, but Marco DeLuca didn't watch. His hands were still stained with blood from a rival he'd just executed. A text buzzed, "I'm coming tonight. We need to talk. Elena." 18 months. She had left him, vanished from his life. He thought he'd moved on. The villa doors opened. Elena stepped inside, cradling a baby girl. Marco froze. A birthmark, the family crest, glimmered on her shoulder. Before he could speak, an explosion ripped through the estate. Fire, gunfire, and chaos erupted around them. And in that moment, everything Marco thought he controlled shattered. Before we dive into today's story, I want to know, where are you watching me from? And what's the time there right now? Blood never smells the way people expect. It isn't metallic. It's warm, thick, almost sweet, cloying when the air is humid. Marco DeLuca stood alone on the balcony of his oceanfront villa, the night pressed against his skin like a second suit. Miami glittered below him, a city that never slept because it never stopped lying to itself. Carnival had turned the coastline into a living artery of noise. Drums pounding, samba rhythms bleeding through the air, fireworks erupting over the bay like controlled explosions. He wiped his hands slowly with a silk handkerchief. The man in the boathouse below was already dead. His body lay folded awkwardly beside a luxury speedboat, throat opened with surgical precision. No struggle, no wasted motion. Marco hadn't raised his voice once. He never did. Screaming was for men who needed to convince themselves they had power. Marco didn't need convincing. At 38, he had mastered stillness, the kind that unsettled rooms. 6'2", broad-shouldered, dark hair slicked back neatly, sharp Italian features carved by years of command and consequence. His tuxedo sat perfectly on him, tailored to erase any hint of the violence he dealt in. The only thing that betrayed him was the faint smear of blood near his cuff, already drying, already forgotten. Fireworks burst overhead, white and red streaks scattering across the sky. For a moment, the reflection in the glass made it look like the city itself was burning. Marco liked that thought. Behind him, the villa hummed to life. Staff moved with rehearsed efficiency. Armed men blended seamlessly among servers and security. Tonight's charity auction wasn't charity. It was theater, a laundering operation wrapped in silk gowns and champagne flutes, politicians, businessmen, art collectors, criminals pretending not to recognize each other, respectable faces, dirty money. Marco adjusted his cufflinks and checked his watch. Timing mattered. Everything mattered. He had built his empire on precision, never late, never sloppy, never emotional. Emotion was a liability. Love was a weakness men like him couldn't afford. That was why Elena had left. 18 months ago, she had walked out of this villa with nothing but a suitcase and a look he still hadn't named. Not fear, not hatred, disappointment. Marco had buried that look beneath deals and executions and expansion. He took ports. He crushed rivals. He expanded north and south until Miami bent around his name. The city learned to breathe when he allowed it. He told himself that meant he had moved on. His phone vibrated in his hand. One message, unknown number. "I'm coming tonight. We need to talk." Elena. The world narrowed. Marco didn't react, not outwardly. He read the message once, then again, then locked the screen. His jaw tightened just enough to hurt. He had invited her weeks ago as part of the performance. An open gesture, a signal to allies and enemies alike that the past no longer touched him. He hadn't expected her to accept. He especially hadn't expected her to choose tonight. Marco slipped the phone into his pocket and turned back toward the villa. The music swelled as the doors opened. Laughter, glasses clinking, the soft rustle of expensive fabric, masks everywhere. Carnival had given them the perfect excuse to hide. He stepped inside, and the room bent around him. People noticed Marco DeLuca, the way animals noticed weather changes. Conversations softened, spines straightened, smiles sharpened. Vito Lombardi appeared at his side almost instantly, as he always did, balding, impeccably dressed, a thin scar pulling at the corner of his mouth when he smiled. "Everything ready," Vito said smoothly. "Guests are arriving. Press is limited, just like you wanted." Marco nodded. "Security?" "Sealed. No one gets in or out without us knowing." Marco's gaze swept the room. He trusted systems more than people, but he trusted Vito more than most. That trust had been earned in blood and years. Still, trust was never blind. It was calculated. "Good," Marco said. "Let's begin." The auction started exactly on time. Art pieces rotated across the stage, rare paintings, sculptures with questionable provenance, items worth millions because the right people said they were. Bidders raised paddles behind jeweled masks, money flowed, influence shifted hands. Marco watched it all with detached satisfaction. This was control. Then the room changed. It wasn't dramatic. No gasp, no announcement, just a subtle disturbance in the air. Marco felt it before he saw her. Elena Rossi stepped through the entrance dressed in deep green, her auburn hair pulled back simply, no mask on her face. She didn't need one. Her presence was disruption enough. Conversations stuttered, heads turned, whispers ignited. She hadn't aged the way time usually punished people connected to Marco DeLuca. If anything, she looked sharper, harder, stronger in a quiet, dangerous way, and in her arms, the world tilted. A baby, small, wrapped in white, dark curls peeking out beneath a knitted cap. Elena held her with practiced ease, protective and unyielding. The child's eyes, hazel unmistakably, lifted and locked onto Marco from across the room. Everything else fell away. Marco's heartbeat slammed once, hard, loud. The baby reached out with a tiny hand, fingers curling reflexively, and the sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the mark on her shoulder. The crest, the DeLuca crest. A birthmark shaped so precisely it felt like mockery, loyalty and vengeance etched into innocent skin. Marco didn't breathe. For a moment, just one, the empire he had built flickered. Elena met his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize. She simply walked forward through the crowd, every step measured, daring him to stop her. Vito noticed. Marco saw it out of the corner of his eye, the way his consigliere's smirk faltered, just slightly, before returning stronger than before. That mattered. Elena stopped a few feet away. "This is Sophia," she said quietly. The name hit harder than any bullet. Marco opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Before he could speak, before he could move, the first explosion shattered the night. Glass blew inward, screams erupted. Fireworks overhead masked the gunfire, turning celebration into slaughter. Alarms wailed, lights flickered, men reached for weapons. Chaos detonated across the villa. Marco's instincts snapped back into place. He moved instantly, pulling Elena and the child toward him as bullets tore through marble and silk. Security shouted, guests scattered. Masks fell, revealing terror underneath. As Marco shielded them, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear, not of death, of loss. Then, through the smoke and screaming, Marco caught sight of a familiar silhouette slipping calmly toward the emergency exits. Vito. And in that instant, as gunfire echoed and the baby cried against his chest, Marco understood one terrible truth. This night wasn't an attack. It was a message, and it had been planned long before Elena ever walked through the door. All right, I'm going to do this cleanly and brutally focused. The panic room sealed itself with a mechanical hiss that sounded too much like a coffin closing. Marco shoved the reinforced door shut and slammed his palm against the biometric lock. Steel slid into place. The noise from outside, gunfire, screaming, shattering glass, dulled into a distant, muffled roar, as if the villa itself were holding its breath. Elena stood rigid in the center of the room, her back to the wall. Sophia clutched tight against her chest. The baby had gone quiet, wide-eyed and alert, in a way that unsettled Marco more than crying would have. Children weren't supposed to adapt that quickly to terror. Marco noticed everything. He always did. The panic room was lit low and clinical, bare concrete walls, weapons racks, security monitors flickering with live feeds from around the property. The auction hall was chaos, masked guests crawling behind overturned tables, blood-staining marble floors, Marco's men returning fire with disciplined bursts. Outside, shadowed figures moved with military precision. This wasn't random. Marco turned slowly toward Elena. For a moment, no one spoke. He studied her the way he studied new territory, methodically, without sentiment. Her breathing was controlled. Her hands didn't shake. She wasn't performing. Whatever she had walked into tonight, she had expected violence. That alone was an accusation. "Explain," Marco said. One word, flat, no anger in it. That was worse. Elena met his gaze without flinching. "Not like this." Marco's jaw tightened. "Like this is the only way it happens. Start talking." She shifted Sophia higher on her shoulder, instinctively angling her body so the child was shielded from him. Marco noticed that too. The subtle message cut deeper than any insult. "You invited me," Elena said. "I didn't force my way in." "You brought a war to my house," Marco replied, "and a child I didn't know existed." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Elena spoke. "I tried to tell you." Marco laughed once, short, humorless. "That's a lie." "No," she said quietly. "That's the part you don't want to hear." She stepped closer, careful but unafraid, stopping just outside his reach. Marco didn't move. If he touched her now, if he touched the child, he didn't trust himself to remain rational. "I called," Elena continued. "I sent messages, emails. I even went through intermediaries. Every line went dead." Marco's eyes flicked to the security monitors without meaning to. The implication registered instantly. Blocked communication meant access. Access meant trust. "That's impossible," Marco said. "No one shuts me out." Elena's expression hardened. "Someone did." The words hung there, poisonous and deliberate. Marco stared at Sophia again. Up close, there was no denying it now. The eyes, the structure of her face, the crest. It was impossible to fake something like that. He had enemies capable of many things, but biology wasn't one of them. "How old?" he asked. 18 months. Marco did the math automatically, the timing aligned too cleanly to ignore. "You left before you knew," he said. "Yes." "Then you found out." "Yes." "And you stayed away anyway." Elena's mouth tightened. "I was taken." The word hit him sideways. "Taken how?" Marco asked. She hesitated. Marco's voice dropped. "Say it." "Kidnapped." The room seemed to contract. "By who?" he demanded. "I don't know," Elena said. "Not at first." That answer irritated him more than a lie would have. Marco hated uncertainty. He built his life eliminating it. "People don't just grab you without a reason," he said. "Not in my world." Elena's eyes flashed. "That was your world. I was just collateral." Marco stepped forward before he could stop himself. "You're telling me someone held you for months, let you give birth, and then let you walk away?" "No," Elena said sharply. "I escaped." The word carried weight. It wasn't dramatic. It was factual, earned. Marco studied her again, recalibrating. She looked different now, not softer, not broken, sharpened, like someone who had learned how to survive without protection. Outside the panic room, the gunfire intensified. One of the monitors flared white, then went dark. Marco didn't look away from Elena. "You chose tonight to walk back into my life. Why?" Elena swallowed. "Because they found me again." That landed. "Who?" Marco asked. She shook her head. "I don't have names, just patterns, pressure, watching." Marco's mind moved fast, too fast. He cataloged enemies, rivals, debts, alliances. Someone had waited. Someone had played the long game. "And you thought bringing that here was smart?" he said. "I thought bringing her to you was necessary." Marco flinched despite himself. Sophia stirred, small fingers gripping Elena's dress. Marco noticed how instinctively Elena soothed her, murmuring softly, grounding her with touch and voice. It was intimate, domestic, completely incompatible with the world Marco occupied. "You should have stayed away," he said. Elena's gaze hardened. "You don't get to say that anymore." Marco turned sharply, pacing the room now, hands clenched behind his back. He hated that she was right, hated even more that he hadn't known. A notification flashed on one of the monitors. Marco stopped. Vito Lombardi appeared on screen, moving through the villa with calm efficiency, issuing orders to men twice his size. He looked unbothered, prepared. Marco stared at the image longer than necessary. Elena followed his gaze. "That's him." Marco didn't answer. "What?" she pressed. He turned back to her. "Who helped you after you escaped?" Elena blinked, thrown by the question. "A nurse. Mia. She hid us. Helped me get documents." "Anyone else?" "No." Marco's eyes flicked back to the screen. Vito disappeared into a secure corridor, one only a handful of people knew existed. The unease crystallized into something sharper. "Elena," Marco said slowly, "when you tried to reach me, how were you blocked?" She frowned. "I don't know. Numbers changed. Messages vanished. It was like you erased me." Marco felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. No one erased people from Marco DeLuca's life without permission or authority. Before he could say anything more, the panic room monitors flickered violently. One by one, the security feeds went black, except one, the exterior camera. A convoy of black SUVs breached the perimeter gates, headlights cutting through smoke and fire. Men poured out, heavily armed, disciplined, not freelancers. Marco recognized the markings instantly. Raul Mendoza. This wasn't a hit. It was an occupation. Elena's voice was barely audible. "They followed me." Marco looked at Sophia again, at the impossible fragility she represented. "No," he said quietly. "They were always coming." A loud clang echoed through the room. Someone was trying to breach the panic room door. Marco reached for a weapon, eyes never leaving the monitor as the biometric lock began to flash red, overridden from the inside system. Only 3 people had that clearance. Marco whispered the name like a verdict. Vito. The door shuttered again, and this time the lock disengaged. Cut to black. The panic room door didn't open. It failed. The lock flashed, sparked, then died with a dull mechanical thud that sounded final in the worst way. The reinforced steel door shuttered once, twice, then stopped. Not breached, disabled. Marco exhaled slowly through his nose. Whoever had overridden the system hadn't come to storm the room. They wanted him sealed inside it. Trapped. The realization sharpened his focus instantly. Marco moved, ripping a rifle from the wall rack and checking the chamber with practiced speed. He handed Elena a smaller handgun without asking if she knew how to use it. She took it. No hesitation. That mattered. "Stay behind me," Marco said. Elena didn't argue. She adjusted Sophia against her chest and shifted behind the concrete support column. The baby whimpered once, then fell silent again, eyes tracking Marco's movements with unsettling awareness. Marco keyed into the auxiliary exit, an older escape route buried into the villa's original foundation. Vito had argued years ago that it was unnecessary. Too many exits created weakness. Marco had kept it anyway. The panel slid open. Smoke poured in. They moved. The corridor beyond was narrow, unfinished concrete, slick with condensation. Emergency lights flickered overhead, stuttering like a dying pulse. Somewhere above them, the villa groaned under sustained impact, Gunfire, explosions, structural stress. This was no longer an ambush. It was a dismantling. Marco took point, every sense calibrated for movement, sound, betrayal. He didn't think about Elena behind him. He didn't think about the child. Thinking slowed reaction time. They emerged into a service hallway that fed into the auction level. The smell hit first. Gunpowder, blood, burning fabric. The auction hall had been transformed into a massacre. Overturned tables lay scattered like wreckage, art pieces shattered against marble floors, priceless works reduced to debris. Bodies were everywhere, some masked, some not. Guests, guards, enemies, allies. It didn't matter anymore. Survival had stripped them all of identity. Marco fired without hesitation, dropping 2 gunmen advancing from the east wing. His men responded instantly, falling into formation around him, relief flashing across their faces when they realized he was alive. "Boss!" Luca shouted, blood running down his temple. "Perimeter's gone. They're pushing in waves." "How many?" Marco asked. "Too many." Marco scanned the room. Near the auction stage, a masked figure stood unnaturally still amid the chaos, bidding paddle still raised as if the event hadn't ended. The man lowered the mask slowly, deliberately, and met Marco's eyes. Recognition hit. Not a soldier, a scout. The man smiled once, thin, satisfied, then disappeared into the smoke as a grenade detonated nearby. Raul Mendoza didn't announce war. He invested in it. Marco felt something twist inside his chest, not fear, but irritation edged with something colder. Mendoza had studied him, anticipated his moves, exploited his weaknesses, and Marco hated nothing more than being understood. "Move," Marco ordered. They advanced through the hall, step by step, fighting for every meter. Marco's men fell back with discipline, covering exits, pulling wounded when possible, abandoning them when not. There were no heroes here, only decisions. Elena stayed close, weapon raised, eyes sharp. She didn't fire, but she didn't freeze either. Marco registered that too. Between bursts of gunfire, Elena spoke. They weren't random. "No," Marco said. "They're mapping." She swallowed. "That's what they did to me. Pressure first, observation, waiting." Marco glanced at her briefly. "You're saying this was always planned?" "Yes." A shot rang out close. Marco returned fire instinctively, dropping the attacker before the man hit the ground. "How long?" Marco asked. Elena hesitated. "Months." The word struck harder than bullets. Months meant patience, resources, internal knowledge. They reached the edge of the hall near a collapsed display wall. Marco crouched, reloading, mind racing through possibilities. Someone had fed Mendoza schedules, layouts, guest lists, security protocols. Someone close, very close. Marco looked across the room again. Vito was nowhere to be seen. They pushed toward the West Wing stairwell. As they moved, Elena's breathing grew shallow. Not panic, pain. Marco noticed the way she favored her left side. "You're hurt," he said. She shook her head. "Later." That wasn't an answer. A blast rocked the stairwell entrance, throwing Marco into a column. His vision blurred for half a second, long enough for someone to rush him. Marco recovered instantly, knife flashing into his hand. He drove it upward, felt resistance, warmth, release. The body collapsed at his feet. He stood over it, chest heaving. Every kill tonight felt heavier, not slower, not sloppier, just heavier. They descended into the lower levels as the villa above continued to burn. Emergency lighting failed completely now, leaving only muzzle flashes and Marco's internal map guiding them. In the darkness, Elena spoke again, low, urgent. "I didn't tell you everything." Marco didn't stop moving. "You're still breathing, that's progress." "They kept records," she said, "names, payments." Marco's stride faltered for the first time. "Where?" Elena shook her head. "Not here." That answer was intentional. "You brought proof," Marco said. "I brought leverage," Elena replied. That stopped him cold. Marco turned to face her in the dark. For a moment they stood inches apart, shadows swallowing them both. Elena's face was streaked with soot and sweat, eyes burning with something that wasn't fear. "You don't trust me," Marco said. "I don't trust your world," she replied. "There's a difference." Before he could respond, one of Marco's men shouted from ahead, "Boss, movement!" Flashlights cut through the darkness. Voices echoed. Heavy boots. Not cartel. Familiar cadence. Marco felt the truth lock into place with brutal clarity. Mendoza's men were outside, but his men were closing in from the inside. Too coordinated. Too clean. Marco raised his weapon, heart hammering. Not from the threat, but from the certainty blooming in his gut. Someone was about to make a play, and whoever it was already believed Marco DeLuca was cornered. The footsteps stopped just beyond the corridor bend. A voice carried through the smoke, smooth and unmistakable. Vito Lombardi didn't step into the corridor. He didn't need to. His voice carried easily through the concrete passage, calm and confident, as if he were standing in his own office rather than the ruins of a burning empire. "Put the guns down," Vito said. "This doesn't have to end messy." Marco didn't move. Neither did his men. The silence stretched long enough to become a weapon. Marco listened, not to the words, but to the space between them. Foot placement, breath, distance. Vito was close but not exposed. He had cover. He always did. "Walk away," Vito continued. "Take what's left and disappear. You've already won more than most men ever will." Marco almost laughed. "You don't talk like a man trying to save his boss," Marco said. "You talk like someone negotiating ownership." A pause. Fractional. Telling. Elena shifted behind Marco. He felt it without turning. She was bracing for impact, not bullets. Truth. Marco raised his voice just enough. "You sold her." The corridor seemed to shrink. Vito exhaled slowly. "You always were dramatic." "Answer me." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes," Vito said. "I did." The word landed with a dull finality. No excuses, no justification, just confirmation. Marco closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, something essential had calcified. "Why?" Marco asked. Vito chuckled softly. "Because you built an empire on fear and expected loyalty to outgrow it. You got comfortable, predictable. You let emotion become a variable." Marco tightened his grip on the weapon. "She was never a variable." Vito's tone sharpened. "She was leverage, and you handed her to me by letting her walk away." Elena inhaled sharply behind him. Marco felt it like a blade sliding between his ribs, not because of guilt, but because Vito was right about one thing. Marco had underestimated the cost of absence. "You kidnapped her," Marco said. "You watched her suffer." "I outsourced," Vito replied smoothly. "Efficiency matters." The words burned. Gunfire erupted suddenly from the far end of the corridor, Mendoza's men pushing closer. The walls shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Time collapsed into urgency. Marco made a decision. "Move," he ordered his men. "Fall back to the service lift." They retreated in controlled bursts, exchanging fire with advancing shadows. Elena moved with them, clutching Sophia tighter as the noise escalated. They reached a reinforced alcove near the old freight elevator. Marco slammed the manual override. The doors groaned, but opened. As they piled inside, Elena grabbed Marco's arm. "Now," she said. She pulled a thin chain from beneath her collar. A small metal casing slid into her palm, scuffed, worn, protected like a relic. Marco stared at it. "What is that?" he asked. "Elena," one of the men hissed. "We don't have time." "Make time," Marco snapped. Elena pressed the object into Marco's hand. "Everything." The word carried weight she didn't explain. The elevator lurched downward, lights flickering violently as bullets sparked against the closing doors. Darkness swallowed them as the lift descended into the understructure of the villa. The hum of motion replaced gunfire. Marco turned the casing over in his hand. He opened it. A USB drive. Plain. Unremarkable. Deadly. "What's on it?" Marco asked. Elena didn't look at him. Names. Dates. Transfers. Routes. Messages. Marco's mind began assembling the implications instantly. Proof. "Enough to burn your entire operation," she said. "And his." Marco felt a strange, hollow pressure behind his sternum. "How did you get it?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I listened. I waited. I survived." The elevator slowed. Marco stared at the drive, then at Elena. "You could have sold this." "Yes. You could have run." "I tried." "Then why keep it?" Marco asked. Elena finally met his eyes. "Because I wanted you to know who you trusted." The doors opened into a subterranean vehicle bay, dim, damp, forgotten by anyone who didn't plan for endings. 2 armored SUVs waited, engines already running. Marco motioned his men forward. As they moved, he slotted the USB into a secure tablet mounted inside the nearest vehicle. Files populated instantly. Too many. Encrypted logs, offshore accounts, internal communications. Marco scrolled. Vito's name appeared again and again. Payments to shell companies tied to Mendoza, messages coordinating shipments that Marco had never authorized, security overrides time-stamped to Elena's disappearance. Marco felt something settle in his bones. This wasn't betrayal. This was succession planning. "They didn't kidnap me to hurt you," Elena said quietly. "They took me to see how you'd react." Marco didn't answer. He watched the timestamps. The earliest file predated Elena leaving. Vito had been planning this before the marriage even collapsed. "Drive," Marco ordered. The SUVs peeled out of the bay as explosions rocked the villa above them. Concrete dust filtered down like ash. The estate was dying. As they tore through underground access roads, Marco continued reviewing the files. Each page stripped away another illusion. Vito had controlled more than Marco realized: logistics, access, communication, loyalty. Marco had been king. Vito had been architect. Elena watched Marco from the corner of her eye. "You're not surprised?" Marco shook his head once. "I'm angry I didn't see it sooner." "That's worse." He didn't disagree. The convoy emerged miles away, bursting into open air beneath a darkened overpass. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, fire, chaos converging. Marco leaned back, tablet still glowing in his hand. "You knew bringing this to me would start a war," he said. "Yes. You knew he'd come for you again." "Yes. You still came." Elena looked down at Sophia, who slept despite everything, because she deserves to know who her father really is. Marco closed the tablet. The words struck harder than any accusation Vito had thrown at him. The SUV slowed as they approached a temporary safe route. Marco's men scanned the surroundings, tension thick in the air. Then Marco's phone vibrated. An incoming call. Unknown number. Marco stared at it for a long second before answering. Vito's voice came through clear and composed. "You found it," Vito said. Marco said nothing. "I expected you would," Vito continued. "You always like knowing the truth." Marco's grip tightened. "You should have killed me." Vito chuckled softly. "No, I needed you alive. For now." The call ended. At the same moment, Marco's tablet flashed red. Remote wipe initiated. Files began disappearing one by one. Elena's breath caught. Marco stared at the screen as evidence vanished in real time, the truth burning itself away. And in that instant, Marco understood the next phase had already begun. Vito wasn't running. The safe house was not meant for families. It was functional, hidden deep in marshland where cell signals drowned and roads dissolved into mud. Concrete walls, steel shutters, a generator that growled like a tired animal. The kind of place men waited to die in or planned revenge from, not where children learned to exist. Marco chose it anyway. The SUVs vanished beneath camouflaged roofing as the doors sealed behind them. The engines cut. Silence rushed in, heavy and unnatural after hours of gunfire and motion. The only sound left was breathing. And then, Sophia cried. Not the startled wail of fear, but something smaller. Need, hunger, discomfort. The ordinary sound of a child demanding attention from a world that didn't care. Marco froze. He had heard screams all his life. Begging, threats, last breaths. None of them had ever stopped him mid-step. This did. Elena moved past him without a word, already unfastening Sophia's coat, checking her fingers, her face, her skin. Maternal instinct in full command. Marco watched from a distance he didn't know how to cross. The men dispersed quietly, giving space without being told. No one wanted to witness this moment. They were soldiers. This wasn't their territory. Marco stood alone near the doorway, jacket streaked with soot and blood that wasn't his. He felt enormous and useless at the same time. "She needs milk," Elena said finally. Not an accusation, a statement of fact. Marco nodded, though he had no idea where milk would come from in a safe house stocked for bullets and emergency rations. He gestured to one of his men, who disappeared immediately to improvise a solution. Sophia's crying softened as Elena rocked her gently, murmuring something Marco couldn't hear. Not words, sounds, reassurance. Marco looked away. He had orchestrated assassinations without blinking, but this quiet competence made him feel exposed. "She shouldn't be here," Marco said. Elena didn't look at him. "Neither should you." That landed exactly where it was meant to. Marco paced the room, restless, every instinct screaming to do something, plan, command, retaliate. Instead, he was reduced to waiting, watching. The tablet sat on the table where he'd thrown it earlier, screen dark now. Whatever evidence had survived the wipe was incomplete, dangerous but insufficient. Vito had anticipated this. Marco hated that more than the betrayal itself. "You didn't tell me you were injured," Marco said. Elena glanced up briefly. "You didn't ask." He noticed the stiffness in her movements now, the way she avoided putting weight on one leg. Blood seeped through a tear near her ribs, slow and stubborn. "Sit," Marco ordered. She ignored him. Marco crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her elbow. Not rough, but firm enough to make his point. Elena turned on him instantly, eyes flashing. "Don't," she warned. Marco didn't release her. "You're bleeding, and you're not my boss anymore." The words hung there, raw and unfiltered. Marco let go. One of his men returned with supplies: powdered milk, water, medical kits scavenged from the vehicles. Elena took them without acknowledgement and focused on Sophia again. Marco watched the baby drink clumsily, her tiny fingers gripping Elena's thumb with fierce determination. Survival distilled into something small and relentless. "She adapted fast," Marco said quietly. Elena nodded. She had to. The implication was clear. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Marco moved to the far wall and leaned against it, folding his arms. For the first time in years, he didn't know where to place himself in the room. He was excess, a threat, a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. Elena didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was steady. "Because knowing you would have put a target on her." Marco closed his eyes briefly. "She already has one," he said. "Yes," Elena replied, "from both sides." That hurt more than it should have. Marco pushed off the wall and faced her. "I can protect her." Elena's laugh was quiet and bitter. "You protect by destroying everything around you." He didn't deny it. "She's not a negotiation," Elena continued. "She's not leverage. She's not your legacy." Marco stiffened at that word. Legacy. He had carved that idea into flesh and concrete, into fear and reputation. He had believed it was something men built and passed on like property. Now it stared at him from a child's face. "I won't let her be used," Marco said. Elena met his eyes. "Then you have to stop being useful." The truth of it hit him with surgical precision. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the roof like distant applause for a tragedy still unfolding. Marco's phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't Vito. It was one of his remaining lieutenants, voice strained. "Boss, we're losing people. They're defecting." Marco closed his eyes. Vito wasn't just attacking him physically. He was hollowing him out. "How many?" Marco asked. "Enough to matter." Marco ended the call. He stared at the floor for a long moment, then looked up at Elena. "I can't keep both," he said. Elena didn't pretend not to understand. "I know. The Empire or her," Marco continued. "One survives, one doesn't." Elena said nothing. Sophia finished drinking and drifted into sleep, chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt fragile and absolute. Marco approached slowly, kneeling in front of them for the first time. Elena stiffened but didn't pull away. He studied Sophia up close, the curve of her cheek, the faint crease between her brows that mirrored his own when he concentrated. The crest was hidden now beneath fabric, but he didn't need to see it anymore. "She looks like me," he said. Elena corrected him softly. "She is you, without the damage." Marco swallowed. Carefully, awkwardly, he extended one finger. Sophia's hand closed around it instantly, grip surprisingly strong. Something inside Marco cracked. Not shattered, shifted. He felt exposed in a way no enemy had ever managed. This child could ruin him without trying. She already had. "I don't know how to do this," Marco admitted. Elena watched him closely. "Then don't pretend you do." The generator coughed. Lights flickered, then steadied. Outside, engines approached. Not fast, not aggressive, measured. Marco rose instantly, every instinct snapping back into place, but now warped by something new. He motioned his men silently into defensive positions. The sound stopped just beyond the perimeter. A single knock echoed through the reinforced door. Not a battering ram, a knock. Marco reached for his weapon, eyes locked on the entrance. A familiar voice spoke from the other side, calm, confident, infuriatingly close. "Marco," Vito Lombardi said, "I know you're in there." Marco felt the room tighten around him. "You should come out," Vito continued, "before you lose what little you have left." Marco looked at Elena, at Sophia, then back at the door. And for the first time in his life, Marco DeLuca hesitated, not because he feared death, but because he finally understood what dying would cost. The knock had been deliberate. 3 slow raps followed by silence, enough to unsettle Marco without giving anything away. He crouched near the reinforced door, rifle in hand, scanning every shadow in the dim light of the generator-lit safe house. Elena held Sophia close behind him, silent, tense. The baby slept, oblivious to the storm outside, but Marco couldn't forget that each breath she drew tethered his instincts to her fragile existence. Vito's voice came again, calm, precise. "Marco, you can end this now. Don't make it messy." Marco's fingers flexed on the rifle. "I didn't bring this here to negotiate," he muttered, almost to himself. Outside, the sound of engines shifted, not the chaotic assault of Mendoza's cartel. This was calculated, Vito's style. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to force Marco into a position that left him no choice but to reveal weakness. Marco's men moved silently, taking up positions along the walls, eyes tracking every vibration, every breath. Marco's plan was immediate: draw Vito into the open, flush him out, and test whether he had overestimated his leverage. The knock came again, the rhythm slower now, deliberate. Marco counted 3 beats, pause, 2 beats. He recognized the pattern. Vito had done this before, not just a tactic, a signature. "Open it," Vito said, his voice almost intimate. "You know you can't hide forever." Marco's eyes flicked to Elena. She met his gaze, steady, unyielding. She didn't need words. She'd already signaled agreement that whatever came next, Sophia's safety would be their priority. Marco exhaled through his nose, the sound sharp, metallic in the small room. He keyed a single command into the panic room console. Steel shutters slid partially back, enough to create a slit. Outside, a figure emerged. A man masked, gun leveled, controlled movements. Marco fired a single round through the gap. The figure crumpled silently. No noise, no reaction, just the echo of the impact against concrete. Vito's chuckle floated through the speaker system. Clever, but predictable. You always react before you think. Marco didn't respond. He recalibrated, already plotting the next move. This wasn't a firefight. This was chess, and every pawn had teeth. He moved Elena and Sophia deeper into the safe house's lower level. The corridors were narrow, unfinished, and lined with hidden exits. Marco memorized every angle, calculating crossfire, choke points, escape routes. Every second counted. Every misstep would cost lives. A shadow moved in the corner of the generator room. Marco pivoted instantly, sweeping the rifle. A flashbang erupted nearby, blinding light, deafening bang. Marco's men hit the floor, shields up, covering Elena instinctively. Marco felt the tremor of the concussion, smelled the acrid sting of chemical smoke. Through the haze, he saw Vito's silhouette appear in one of the far hallways, rifle casually slung, calm, untouchable. "You always did overestimate your reach," Vito said, voice amplified by the acoustics. "You think you've prepared for everything, but I prepared for you." Marco fired 2 precise shots at the lights overhead, plunging the corridor into near darkness, leaving only the red emergency lighting and the intermittent glow from their weapons. "Keep her safe," Marco muttered to his men. Then to Elena, "Move, now." They advanced through the labyrinthine lower levels, ducking behind structural supports, vaulting over debris from previous skirmishes, each step measured, each breath tactical. Every creak, every drip of condensation echoed in the tense silence. Then a voice, unmistakable, came from behind them. "Marco." Vito had bypassed the blind spots, always ahead. He stepped from the shadows into a narrow intersection, pistol in hand. Marco froze just long enough to calculate angles. "You're cornered," Vito continued, voice even, almost mocking. "One misstep and this ends. Permanently." Marco assessed. The walls were too narrow for a firefight. The corridor offered little room for maneuver. Retreat was limited. Vito had engineered the trap perfectly. Marco signaled silently to his men, repositioning them to create overlapping fields of fire, ready to turn Vito's confidence against him. Elena clutched Sophia, crouched low, poised in the shadows. The child stirred but remained silent, instinctively aware of the tension, the predator and prey dynamics unfolding around her. Vito raised his gun slowly. "It doesn't have to be like this, Marco. We can rebuild. Together." Marco's finger twitched on the trigger. He didn't respond. Words were useless here. Betrayal required action. Suddenly, the ceiling above them creaked ominously. A structural anomaly Marco had noted only moments before. A distraction. He took the shot instinctively. Sparks flew as the bullet struck steel piping, sending water cascading down the hallway. Vito ducked, but the movement revealed his position further. Marco advanced, using the smoke and water to obscure his silhouette, forcing Vito into a narrow engagement zone. Bullets ricocheted, splintering concrete, punching holes in the reinforced walls. Each step forward cost energy, focus, and patience. But Marco's mind never wavered. A flash of movement from the end of the corridor drew his attention. Mendoza's men had begun converging on the safe house, alerted by the commotion. Vito had baited Marco not just into a trap, but into a battlefield. "Don't underestimate me," Marco muttered. Vito smirked, ducking behind a support pillar. "I never do." Marco fired again, pinning Vito temporarily. He then signaled to his men to flank, forcing Vito to move, exposing himself further. Marco's tactical mind played the angles like a lethal puzzle. Elena's voice broke through the chaos. "Marco, behind you!" One of Mendoza's men had slipped in through an unsecured vent. Marco pivoted, shooting first, thinking later. The man fell silently. The hallway was death and calculation in equal measure. Vito took advantage of the distraction, firing, forcing Marco to dive behind cover. Dust, smoke, and sparks filled the corridor. Marco's vision narrowed, each breath counted, each step deadly. Then, something unexpected. A small panel along the wall slid open, revealing a USB drive blinking red. The same drive Elena had given him earlier, but it wasn't hers. This one was live. Vito's voice echoed through the hall, triumphant. "Everything you thought you controlled is mine now, Marco. You've been playing my game all along." Marco realized instantly. The trap wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Vito had anticipated his moves, his priorities, even his attachments. He gritted his teeth. "Not everything," he muttered, moving faster, advancing with lethal precision toward the source. Vito's laughter followed every calculated step. "You'll see soon enough. One wrong choice and you lose more than just your empire." Marco's focus sharpened. He wasn't thinking about the guns, the men, or even Vito. He was thinking about Sophia, the child asleep against Elena's chest, unaware of the world collapsing around her. The corridor ended abruptly at a reinforced hatch leading to the upper levels. Marco assessed it. No cover, exposed to Vito, exposed to Mendoza, but necessary for escape. He signaled Elena and the men. "Go, I'll create the opening." Vito's voice cut through the tension again. "Marco, don't be a fool. You can't protect her here." Marco's hand tightened around the rifle. Every calculation, every strategy, every ounce of his life distilled into one brutal truth. Someone had to hold the line. He took a single step forward and the corridor erupted. Vito had triggered a secondary mechanism. Smoke, sparks, and a structural collapse blocked the exit behind them, forcing Marco to fight forward into unknown terrain. The world narrowed into sight, sound, and instinct. No allies, no safety, just survival, betrayal, and calculation. And then, from the darkness, a whisper, low and deliberate. The safe house was no longer a refuge. It had become a trap of his own making. Concrete walls now felt like iron bars. Every corridor was a gauntlet, every shadow a threat. Marco's men had fortified positions, but even they moved like ghosts, tense, uncertain. Each of them knew the difference between survival and execution was measured in inches. Marco crouched behind a metal support beam. Sophia pressed against Elena's chest in her makeshift carrier. The baby's eyes flicked open briefly, absorbing the darkness and the tension, already sensing danger in ways a child shouldn't. Marco's chest tightened. This was no longer a battlefield, it was a crucible. Above them, the upper floors of the villa had collapsed into chaos. Smoke poured through cracks in the ceiling, acrid and suffocating. Fire licked the edges of the reinforced steel shutters. The generators groaned, warning of imminent failure. Vito's voice came again through a hidden comm system, calm, deliberate, omnipresent. "Marco, you've been so careful, so meticulous, and yet, here you are, exposed. Tell me, how does it feel to be prey?" Marco's hand flexed on the rifle. He did not answer. Words were useless. Every syllable was a vulnerability. A volley of gunfire erupted from the ventilation shafts. Mendoza's men had coordinated with Vito perfectly. Marco's men fell back, covering angles, but losses were mounting. Luca went down first, a clean shot to the temple. Blood pooled against the concrete like ink, shocking in its suddenness. Marco ducked and returned fire. 2 attackers dropped instantly. He moved fast, controlled, lethal. But the cost was clear. His force was bleeding, and the enemy was closing every gap he could create. "Elena," Marco muttered, "stay low. Don't move unless I say." Elena nodded, pale but steady. Her hands were white around Sophia, holding her with quiet determination. She had become more than just a survivor. She was now a weapon in the unseen war that surrounded them. Marco's eyes scanned the monitors salvaged from the previous floor. Limited feeds, shadows moving with military precision. Every doorway, every stairwell, every possible exit already compromised. They were boxed in. A sudden noise, a metallic click, echoed in the corridor. Marco froze. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate. He traced it, rifle raised, and saw the trap. Mines rigged into the floor, designed for anyone attempting to flee. Vito wasn't just controlling the attack, he was controlling the environment. Marco cursed under his breath. Every move was anticipated, every instinct accounted for. He pivoted, signaling to his remaining men. "Cover the exits. Stay tight." From the far corner, Elena whispered, "There's someone else." Marco's gaze shifted. A figure emerged from a side corridor, masked, rifle trained on them. But it wasn't Mendoza's men. It was one of Marco's lieutenants, a face he trusted. Betrayal. Marco didn't flinch. He shot first. The man crumpled without a sound. The bullet pierced clean, precise. Marco's stomach churned, but hesitation could kill them all. Vito's voice came again, tinged with satisfaction. "Surrounded by ghosts, Marco. You fight, you kill, you watch your own men die, and for what? Pride?" Marco gritted his teeth. Pride had long been weaponized into survival, but now it was a liability. He moved Elena and Sophia deeper into the service tunnels, using old maintenance paths Vito likely hadn't considered. But even as he advanced, he knew it was temporary. Every exit funneled them toward one central point, the old loading dock. They emerged into a cavernous space, the dim light from overhead bulbs swinging. Rainwater pooled on the floor. The sound of footsteps echoed from multiple directions. Marco's heart raced, not with fear, but with calculation. Mendoza's men appeared first, breaking formation like predators sensing weakness. Marco engaged instantly, gunfire ricocheting against steel walls. One attacker fell. 2 more went down. The rest retreated temporarily, regrouping. Then Vito emerged from the shadows himself. Clean, unhurried, pistol leveled, eyes sharp. He didn't need to hide. Marco could feel the tension radiating from him. "You can't escape," Vito said. "Not now, not ever. Every choice you make, every path you take, I control." Marco stepped forward, rifle raised. "You'll need more than control." Vito smirked, firing twice. Marco ducked, returning fire. Bullets tore into the concrete around them. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the air. The acrid tang of gunpowder burned in their lungs. Elena pulled Sophia down behind a crate, crouching low. "They're going to kill us all," she whispered. "Not if I can help it," Marco said, voice low, deadly. The firefight escalated. Marco's movements were precise, every shot calculated. But each man down increased the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. He couldn't lose Elena, he couldn't lose Sophia, and he couldn't lose control. Then he saw it, a hatch in the floor, partially concealed beneath a tarpaulin. Emergency escape. He could get them out. But reaching it meant crossing a corridor exposed to Vito and Mendoza simultaneously. Marco assessed. Seconds to make a decision. One misstep could kill all of them. He motioned to Elena. "Follow me exactly. Don't deviate." They moved. Step by step, bullets ricocheted, sparks danced across walls. Marco's men covered rear positions, engaging Mendoza's advancing soldiers. Halfway across, Vito appeared at the corridor's end, rifle trained, a sinister calm on his face. "You really think you can get out alive?" Marco didn't flinch. He fired, hitting a pipe above Vito. Water burst down in a torrent, obscuring vision, giving them a fraction of a second to advance. They reached the hatch. Marco tried the latch. Locked. Vito's laughter echoed above. "Always the meticulous one," Vito taunted. "And yet you still underestimate me." Marco's hand went to the emergency override. Sparks flew, metal groaned. Mendoza's men were regrouping behind him. Elena shielded Sofia, tense, ready. The hatch began to give, just as a second figure appeared behind it. Someone Marco had trusted most, a man who had always been loyal. Betrayal. Marco froze. Before he could react, a gunshot echoed. The figure went down, but the recoil threw Marco off balance. Elena screamed. Sofia stirred, frightened. Marco grabbed them both, spinning, searching for cover. Vito's voice floated from somewhere above. "Decisions, Marco. Every life counts. Which ones will you save?" Marco's gaze fell on the hatch. Escape, exposure, death, survival. He realized one brutal truth. No choice here was safe. And then a chilling whisper reached his ears, not through words, but through instinct. The safe house trembled under the weight of the night. Concrete groaned, steel supports threatened to buckle, and the acrid smell of gunfire and smoke clung to every surface. Marco DeLuca stood in the center of the corridor, rifle steady, eyes fixed on the chaos surrounding him. Elena shielded Sofia against her chest, her small frame tense but unbroken, while Marco's remaining men hunkered behind debris, weapons drawn, every nerve primed for survival. Vito Lombardi emerged from the smoke at the far end, calm and precise, pistol leveled, eyes cold. Behind him, Mendoza's men advanced methodically, disciplined and ruthless, their intent clear. Marco's heart didn't race. He didn't have the luxury, but his mind ran calculations at a speed impossible to track. Every angle, every threat, every life under his command weighed on him simultaneously. "You've fought well, Marco," Vito said, voice carrying over the din, smooth and cutting. "But the night ends here. You can't protect her, and you can't protect your empire. Pick one." Marco's gaze flicked to Elena and Sofia. The baby's eyes, wide and innocent, mirrored his own intensity. Marco didn't hesitate. The empire could burn, but family was non-negotiable. "Not one step closer," Marco growled, moving backward slowly, forcing Vito toward the center of the corridor, a narrow kill zone he had memorized in seconds. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off steel and concrete, smoke blinding, the air thick with heat and powder. Mendoza's men opened fire from the stairwell, forcing Marco to dive behind a pile of debris. Two of his men went down instantly, blood staining the floor like a warning. Marco fired back, precision killing, forcing the attackers to stagger and regroup. Each shot was deliberate, measured, a promise of lethal intent. Vito advanced, stepping into the center of the corridor. "You always think you can calculate everything, but the one variable you never accounted for, your daughter." Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. He moved swiftly, ducking under Vito's line of fire, slamming his shoulder into the man with brutal force. Vito staggered back, pistol sliding across the floor. Marco grabbed it, spinning, pressing it to Vito's temple. "You betrayed me," Marco said quietly, venom lacing every syllable. "You used my world to destroy my life." Vito's smirk faltered, just slightly. "You built your world on blood, Marco. Don't pretend this shocks you." The safe house shuddered violently, a secondary explosion erupting somewhere above. Dust rained down, choking and heavy. Mendoza's men froze for a fraction of a second, long enough for Marco to act. He fired, precise, brutal. Two men dropped instantly. Marco pivoted, grabbed Elena's arm, and moved her and Sofia behind another steel column. Every movement was survival, every breath calculated. "You can't leave here alive," Vito said, regaining composure, reaching for a secondary weapon. Marco fired again. Vito's arm was hit and he dropped to one knee, cursing under his breath. Marco advanced, step by step, gun leveled, the rage of betrayal fueling his movements. Then Mendoza himself appeared from the shadows, massive, tattooed, and cruel, gun aimed directly at Marco. A brief, silent standoff. 3 lives balanced on a knife's edge. Marco, Vito, Mendoza. Marco's eyes darted to the ceiling supports, the structural weaknesses. A plan formed, a gamble worthy of desperation. He fired at a steel beam near Mendoza, sparks flying, metal groaning. The ceiling shifted precariously. Mendoza charged, confident brute force over calculation. Marco sidestepped, pulling Elena and Sofia behind cover. The beam above Mendoza groaned, then collapsed, trapping him under debris and steel. His roar echoed, but he couldn't move. Vito scrambled, trying to escape Marco's reach. Marco advanced, gun leveled. "You destroyed my life," he said, "and now you'll pay." Vito raised his hands, pleading. Marco hesitated just long enough to see the reflection of Sofia in the man's eyes. Fear, recognition, manipulation. Marco's decision was absolute. He fired. One shot, clean, precise. Vito's body collapsed. No theatrics, no mercy. Just the end of betrayal. Silence fell. The safe house trembled with settling debris, smoke curling through cracks in the walls. Marco approached Elena, who held Sofia tightly. The baby stirred, then nestled into her mother's chest. Marco knelt, taking a steadying breath, allowing the first real moment of relief to touch him. "This is over," Elena whispered, voice trembling yet resolute. Marco looked at her, at Sofia, and then at the wreckage around them. The empire he had built, the men he had trusted, all gone or shattered. But here, in this moment, there was clarity. Survival didn't mean control. Survival meant protection. Family. Redemption. He held Sofia in his arms for the first time, feeling the fragility of life and the weight of choices made and avoided. Elena watched, her expression unreadable, hope and caution intertwined. Outside, dawn began to break, painting the sky in bruised oranges and purples. Marco's phone buzzed, a single message from an unknown number. He opened it. "We underestimated you, Marco. This isn't over." Marco's eyes narrowed. He crushed the phone in his hand, looking at Elena and Sofia. For the first time, he understood the truth of his life. The world would always try to take them from him, but he had chosen them over power, and he would fight to the last breath to protect them. Smoke rose from the villa in the distance, a crimson testament to a past life. But Marco's legacy, blood-soaked, chaotic, and yet ultimately human, was no longer about fear. It was about survival and redemption.